In this example, I want to go ahead and look at how I can secure my API using API keys and usage plans. So right now, this um, this API is publicly accessible, and I can see that if I go out to a browser, I can see this API in action. So I can see all the records that I have. And I don't care about the rest of the endpoints, but this HTTP GET endpoint is publicly accessible. And what I want to do is I want to secure this endpoint. So for instance, let's say I was going to be creating a API where I wanted to charge customers for accessing the API. Well, obviously I have to secure it and it can't be publicly accessible on the web. So the way we're going to handle this today is we're going to use API keys and usage plans. So if I go back over to API Gateway, I have my API built, and then down here on the left-hand section, you can see the usage plans and API keys. So I'm going to start by going to the usage plans. And you'll notice that I've already configured a couple of usage plans. So I have a free usage plan, so you can make 10 requests per second, up to 1,000 per month, or 100 per second, up to 1,000 per month. I'm going to create a usage plan here. I'm going to call it my premium usage plan, where we'll increase those limits. Premium, my rate, requests per second that my customers can make, so 1,000. I'll make the burst the same, and then they can make up to 250,000 requests per month. Okay, so I'll create that usage plan. So there's my premium usage plan. And then I want to set up an API key. So I want to set up an API key. And this is essentially what you'd share with your customers. And they'd be providing this API key then to access our API. So I'm going to create an API key. My name is going to be Premium Customer. I'm going to auto-generate the API key. Okay, and then I'm going to associate it with a usage plan. So I'm going to go ahead and pick one of the 3 usage plans that I have. So it's a premium customer, so premium usage plan. And then lastly, the last thing I have to do is you'll notice that I can associate an API or a stage. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So under usage plans, under API keys, I want to add a usage plan. No, I already have the usage plan, sorry. I could add another usage plan, but I don't necessarily want to do that. I think it's under the usage plans, and if I click on that, you'll notice that there's the associated stages. So I can go ahead and add a stage. And then I can select the API that I want and the stage that I want. Okay, and then method level throttling, I can do that, but so basically method level throttling is getting a little too detailed for what we want to do, but basically if I'm allowing 250,000 requests per month, I could also say, up to 50K per month for each endpoint if I wanted to, or each HTTP verb, but I'm going to go ahead and add that stage to the usage plan. Okay, so now I think I'm all set up. So I have an API key, I have a usage plan. The usage plan is associated with a particular API stage. And now if I go back over to my API, and I'm looking at my API, let's go to the GET, because that's the easiest one to test, because I can just go to a browser and it'll make an HTTP GET request. You'll see that I'm still able to access the API. That's no problem. But what I want to do is I want to secure it now, and the way I'm going to do that is in this method request of my HTTP GET. So I've selected the HTTP GET, and I always think of each of these, the method request, the integration response, and the method response, as checkpoints. So as the request is coming in, we hit the first checkpoint, which is the method request checkpoint. And this is where we might do our API key check. Okay, so that's what's going to happen here. And then if we have the API key, then it'll pass through, and basically the integration request decides the client sent some data, what should actually end up at our Lambda function. Okay, our Lambda function eventually executes and returns a response. We're able to then format that response. So, for instance, let's say we were getting a collection of student information, and that student information came back from Lambda, and each student had their social security number in plain text. The integration response might say, we don't really want to share the social security number, so we're going to mask certain characters for the social security number so it's not in plain text. So we could do that in the integration response. And then the method response, the way I use it is for the CORS headers, right? So it determines which HTTP headers actually get sent to the client based on the initial request. Okay, but for this case, since we're dealing with API keys and usage plans, we want that to be checked right away. So we want to essentially bail on the request if the API key is not included. So if I click on the method request, down below you'll notice that the API key required is set to false. I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to require an API key. So I'm just clicking on that checkbox. Okay, so now it's required. I'm going to deploy the API. Okay, so now in order to do that HTTP GET request, now I do require an API key. So I can see that on the method request. So an API key is required. And now if I come over here, I'm holding down the Shift key as I reload this page. And you'll notice that I'm getting an error message saying it's forbidden. Okay, so there is no easy way for me to now test this in a browser because I now require an API key to access this API. Through code, I can pass this as an HTTP header, but the best testing tool for APIs that I use is Postman. So Postman's what I want to use. So I want to go to this API, and you should see that if I make the request just kind of as is with no API key, I should get the same exact error message. So I get that forbidden error message. So that's kind of to be expected. What I really want to do though is when I make this request, I actually want to pass a header, and that header that I want to add is the XAPI key. Okay, so I'm going to pass an XAPI key header, and then I'm going to go get that API key. So I have the premium customer API key. I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to paste that into my value. So now I'm passing that API key along with the request. And now if I send this request, now you'll notice that I am getting my data, and it's able to successfully pass through that HTTP GET where it's checking for a valid API key. And then AWS is going to manage the usage plans and the API keys and see that the request came from the specific customer so that they have access up to 250,000 requests per month because of the usage plan that API key is tied to. Okay, if I go back to my API, you'll notice that I only did that for the HTTP GET. If I actually want this whole API to be protected via that API key, then I'm going to have to go into each individual method and secure them. So if I go to the delete, I can come in here and edit it and say yes, an API key is required. So I've done that for the delete. I've done it for the post. So right here, I'm going to do it for the post. I don't typically do it for the options. Okay, so what the options is it's really it's there so that a browser can navigate that CORS check. And basically what it is a pre-check saying which HTTP verbs are available and is it supported by CORS. So that options request, typically I'm not going to pass an API key, and I'm typically not in control of making that options request, so typically I don't actually enable the API key on the options, but then I'd also have to do it in this GET as well. So I'd come through and say yes, an API key is required. And then I'd deploy the API. And now, regardless of whether I'm doing a delete, a get, a post, or using a URL parameter to do a HTTP GET on a specific type of object. All of those different operations are going to require an API key, and it's all going to count against my customer's access to my API. Okay, so that's how I'd use API keys and usage plans to secure API.